And the thing to know about relationships is that the same intervention that saves some will sink others. And that when you think relationships, you have to think contextually and not dogmatically.
Esther Perel is a renowned psychotherapist, best-selling author of Mating in Captivity, and a highly sought-after speaker. Her unique insight into modern love, infidelity, and intimacy has revolutionized our understanding of relationships.
Often people will choose a form of therapy that is probably not the one that they actually need, meaning they tend to choose the therapy that reinforces their own coping style.
How do you practice yourself being a good spouse?
I try to keep things in perspective and to laugh when my husband tries to bring humor to situations that could become really nasty.
Good.
And I used to think, no, you're making fun, you're making... And now I think, you're absolutely right. What are we going to do? Argue about this 40 years later, still the same argument? No, you're right.
Can you give me, based on your 40 years experience, the perfect recipe for ruining a relationship and the perfect recipe for staying single all your life?
I think the big killer, more than any other.
Hello and welcome to Kaplankaya on the southwestern Aegean coast of Turkey. We are recording the podcast, the Harvest series, where we interview amazing speakers, practitioners and artists joining the Harvest Summit. I hope you will enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the Harvest Series podcast. Thank you for watching. Today I'm excited to introduce our guest, Esther Perel. Esther is a renowned psychotherapist, best-selling author of Mating in Captivity, and a highly sought-after speaker. Her unique insight into modern love, infidelity, and intimacy has revolutionized our understanding of relationships. In this episode, we'll draw on Esther's 40 years of experience as a psychotherapist to see how her wisdom can be applied to other areas, including democracy and corporate strategy. Thank you for joining us, and let's dive in. Hello Esther.
Thank
Bonjour.
you. Merci.
Thank you so much for being here, being in Kaplankaya, and taking the time to do this podcast with me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, you have 40 years of experience and have helped thousands of couples. Everyone hangs on our every word and beg for advice on how to help their relationship on your every word. First question, why is it so hard? Why do relationships have to cause so much suffering?
Relationships bring the best and the worst to our lives. I often say that it is the quality of your relationships that determines the quality of your life. And relationships have never been simple. That's not the idea. But there is a way in which, in some way, one could say that one question would be, why is just a simple act of loving not enough? Yeah. Because it's not, because people have all kinds of layers in their experiences with each other. Sometimes they have a leaning towards the other person, and there is care and closeness and protection and safety and joy and pleasure. And sometimes there is aggression and hatred and destruction and possession and jealousy and envy. And we have a range of emotions inside of us, and they all play out in our relationships. So that's if you look kind of within relationships. But if you look on the larger social changes, I think one of the very interesting things that has happened is religion in the West has weakened. Hierarchies have weakened. Mm-hmm. Traditional social structures have weakened. And we have operated a massive transfer of the needs that we used to bring to the realm of the divine into our relationships and our jobs. Mm-hmm. We demand from our relationships meaning, ecstasy, transcendence, wholeness. We demand from our jobs purpose, belonging, community, things that really used to belong to our communal living and our religious lives. And that is making relationships ever more complicated.
So, can you give me, based on your 40 years experience, the perfect recipe for ruining a relationship and the perfect recipe for staying single all your life?
I think the big killer, more than any other, is contempt, le mépris.
Ouais.
You can hate someone one day and then make up with them again. You can be really angry and then make peace. But contempt involves a dismissal of the other person, a dehumanization, a disregard. I would say contempt and indifference are two of the mega killers.
Is it like a non-return point?
In many instances, yes. Depends. I mean, it's hard in relationships. It's hard to make these kind of definitive statements. Yeah. John Gottman, who's a major researcher on relationships, says that there are 4 horses of apocalypse. One is criticism. Mm-hmm. The other is defensiveness. Mm-hmm. The other is stonewalling. Yeah. And the other is contempt. Okay. But I agree with him that contempt is probably the one that sits above all the others. Because I look at you with disgust. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you can tell me anything you want. It doesn't matter. I have no empathic connection anymore. Mm-hmm. I discard you. I can do all kinds of things to you from this place. Oh, yeah. What keeps people single? There are lots of different things. But I think in this era of romantic consumerism, where we often kind of let go of the good because we keep searching for the perfect, I would say that the commodification of people is one of the things that is making singlehood last longer. Right. This notion that I can get better. You know, we live with this FOMO. I have 1,000 choices at my fingertips, and I keep thinking, I can do better. I can do better. The story I hear over and over again from both men and women is that they go on 2-3 dates, and then they get ghosted. And it was nice. It was all fine. You kind of wonder, and then the ghosting is done, basically that's it, it's immediately, without any conversation, without having to see the person that you're dumping, without having to even think for a second about what that person may be feeling. And then you continue your consumerism. So I don't think that what makes one stay longer in singlehood is just individual behavior. Yeah. I really think that there's a system around it that is rigged, that is making people, you know, be in this maze, looking, but never finding. And I think that we need to not just put all the responsibility on the individuals. There's a part of it that is on individuals, but there's a system that feeds this.
Okay, and the system is these applications,
yes,
dating applications?
partly dating apps, but because there's a conflict. The goal is for you to get off the app, but the app makes money from your staying on the app. Right. So that's the fundamental piece here is that, and then it's also that we no longer just start talking to somebody that we meet in a queue or in an airplane or at a concert or in a movie line. I mean, you know, you're sitting in a bar and instead of looking around and seeing who's there, you basically are texting while the people are literally in front of you. You sit on a subway. How many people met on a subway? Because somebody began to talk to someone because, you know, you're reading that book. How is it? I like your bag, something. Now I sit on a subway in New York City, not a single person lifts their head. Mm-hmm. They have no idea who is sitting next to them. So when you've got that kind of social atrophy, the opportunities to meet people are curtailed by a lot.
Right. Why do people even get together in the first place? Do you think it's just to have babies and preserve the human race?
No, I think that there is a thing that says that we are wired for connection. We don't survive in isolation. Our species doesn't survive in isolation. We need connection. We need connection that feeds us, that allows us to know that we exist. And here's a piece that I think can clarify that. There's a beautiful concept in developmental psychology. It's called object constancy. When I am 8 months old, give me your pen, and I'm the baby, I do this. And for the first time, I realize that the pen still exists even when I don't see it.
Yeah.
And so what does adult do? Come on. Pick up the pen.
Yeah.
And what does the kid do?
Drop it again.
And this game begins. And for the first time, that notion that something that I don't see is still there leads us into what we begin to experience when we are a year and a half old, which is called object or people constancy. You leave, and I know that you will come back. We play peekaboo.
Yeah.
Peekaboo is the universal game that lets me know that even though you don't see me, I am here, and even though I don't see you, you will reappear. That is the fundamental protection against abandonment. And that allows the kid to go away, to play, and to come back, and to know that when they come back, you will be there, or to let you leave without having a mega crisis every time. And that is the beginning of trust, that you exist inside another even when you're not next to them. And they exist inside of you even when you are away from them. You're never alone in that way. You can travel for 6 months, but you know that there are people in the world who are thinking of you. And that reflection, I think, is quite fundamental to our emotional, physical well-being.
Wow. After such a long experience in advising couples, talking about relationships, I'm sure you have developed like a mega intuition about couples. Does it happen to you that when you see a couple, you see that they're very strong without even talking to them for so long? You see they're very strong and they're made to last. And some couples, you want to simplify their life and tell them to split right away.
I can do a lot of guessing, and I love being wrong. Because then you learn something. If you write, then so what's new?
Boring. Yeah.
But if you were mistaken, and you judged too soon, or you decided too soon, then you actually learn something. So I think of a couple script or a couple dynamic a little bit like a partition of music. If I start to sing a few notes, la la la, it's often the case that the second part will be la la la. So if I see couple do ABC, this type of ABC, I often guess D, E, F probably will be that.
Yes, okay.
Do you understand?
Yeah, and you're often right.
And I'm often accurate. It's not so much about right, but I'm accurate. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's ta-na-na, ta-na-na-na. And then I'm like, oh, they actually are taking me in a different place. So I can, some people are very good here at Harvest to read spreadsheets. I read relational maps. I have a sense when this goes on, and I've asked you one question and you've answered me yes or no to that question, it probably goes together with this and this. So I connect people and events and experiences very quickly. But I think the most important thing is not to be accurate. The important thing is to say, this is what I just thought. Hot or cold? Chaud ou froid?
Ouais.
That's my favorite expression. Chaud ou froid? Am I on track?
Okay.
Is this it?
Am I burning?
Am I am I close? And then to say to the person, now say it in your own words.
Okay.
So that they own it. It's their story. Relationships are stories.
Is it often that you have the idea of what's going to happen, and you make them? That's your strategy in a way, and to help them make them their story. For example, if you have 1 hour with a couple, quite quickly enough, you know what you want them to say, and you make them realize it.
So most of my sessions today are no longer 1 hour. First of all, I take at least an hour and a half, 2 to 3 hours. When, especially, I have a podcast. Where should we begin?
Fantastic.
And it is 3-hour anonymous couples therapy sessions or 1 hour individual sessions with people from all over the world. They're not patients that apply to be on the podcast. And it is probably the first time that you enter the therapy of another couple and you listen in. When a couple comes to see me, before they see me, I read the intake. And I see how people describe what is the issue, why am I coming, what would I like Esther to help me with, what would I like to leave with, things like that. And I see the words. When I meet them the first time, if I see that they're saying actually the same things and with the same words, then I begin to have a sense of their story. The way they narrate their perception of reality, how they attribute responsibility, blame, you name it. The meaning they give to the events in their lives and all of that. And at that moment, I think you come in with one story. My goal is that at the end of the session, you leave with another story. Because from there starts possibility.
Yeah.
You, for example, I because it's the last session I did, so she's on my mind. Young 25-year-old woman that I mentioned in my talk yesterday comes to say, shall I break up with my dad? And her first line is, my dad has always been financially supportive of me, but he's never been there emotionally for me. And then she proceeds to tell me about how critical he is of her, and I have a sense that she's equally critical of him. They're actually asymmetric. Everything she complains to him about, I guess he would say the same thing about her.
Yeah, okay.
And then she proceeds to tell me how poor he grew up and how basically he had no opportunity to develop an emotional language because he was making sure that he had something to eat. And so I begin to think, this man has been financially supporting you, but it is not just material support for him. It's actually deeply emotional. You've divided it, that because you would want something else that you consider emotional support. I completely get it and respect it, but you're misjudging your father. So I said to her, have you ever considered telling your dad, Dad, your ability to support me through university must be such a proud accomplishment for you. I know how important that was for you. To ever be able to say to your child, you will never be hungry. That must feel so good for you, and I deeply appreciate it.
Wow, I think that's a super moving
You
story.
do that. Yeah. You change your relationship with your father. You do not need to break up. But she was stuck in he's not there for me, he's not there for me, and there were other reasons. He also left her mother. It's not just that. But it's like, let me show you a whole other way, hopefully, that you can look at this man, that will actually elicit some compassion for this man, and that will make you, release you from the position of, you're not there for me, I need you and you're not there for me. Changes into, you have been there for me in ways that were so meaningful to you. Something I wish wasn't there, but I don't doubt that for you, this way has been so important. So you don't take anything away from what she wants, but you also liberate her from the stuckness of waiting. Will you? Will you? And if he doesn't, then I have to break up with you. Why should she break up with her father?
Right. That's such a positive approach. Do you think we have an issue in modern society about emotional availability? We focus too much on the language on the language and not enough on the acts in a general manner. Like people have emotion and are emotionally available, but we're just waiting for the language of it and not enough of the act.
I think that in a way, Freudian psychology, which was kind of the origin of this inquiry into our inner life, of the modern version of it at the end of the 19th century, often looked at what was missing, at the lack of things.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a reason that positive psychology came to counteract the dominant. Positive psychology is often completely extreme in its willingness to see everything in a certain way, but it came because there was a bias.
Yeah.
The bias was that there was a lot of focus on what's missing, what's negative, what you didn't have, what you don't have inside of you, and the idea that if you understand that will help you change. I think that we are doing a good job at actually, even me, I know that I spent 20 plus years in therapy rarely saying something good to people.
Okay.
That this is great, this is really beautiful, you have this in you, or that was a beautiful way of answering, or did you notice that eyes? That's very different from what you typically talk about. Did you notice it? The change just happened right now. And I totally changed once I began to look for the good, look for the positive, look for the what we call unique moments.
What you already have.
You know?
Yeah. Okay.
Then, you know, I think that you come to therapy to change the way you act, to change the way you feel, and to change the way you think, or to understand and change. But basically, it's a cognitive, it's a physical, and it's an emotional. It's all three all the time at the same time. And interestingly, I think that often people will choose a form of therapy that is probably not the one that they actually need. Meaning they tend to choose the therapy that reinforces their own coping style. So if you're an action-driven person, you often want a therapy that is action-driven, when in fact you probably are a person who should actually sit down for a moment, do nothing, and take a minute and reflect. If you are a thinker and a mental, ruminator, you probably like this kind of therapy, but in fact you would do well with a therapy that kicks you in the butt and just makes you do something and stop thinking, because you've been thinking for 10 years in psychoanalysis.
Fascinating. Okay.
So there are different leanings and there are different focuses in therapy, and often I think we end up in the therapy that reinforces the defense system rather than what actually we need.
I understand so much. Okay. You were talking about stories and how in a relationship everybody comes with its own story. So we live in a world with lots of conflicts right now, and you're often saying that individuals are stuck in their own story in relationships. Do you think it's the same for countries? And would they need like an Esther Perel to help?
I wish I could say that there's something I can offer, but I typically let other people decide if what I do can help them, rather than me deciding that for them. So I do sit at tables of people who make big decisions in politics, in business, etc. And I realize that they often appreciate a relational perspective. If two nations each, or three nations, but if countries and groups and communities are entrenched in a story, and they absolutely want a recognition for that story, it matters to actually understand what is empathic witnessing. An empathic witness, somebody who says, yes, this is really something horrible that happened to you. If you don't do that, meaning something's going to happen to people. It happens on individuals and it happens to communities. I mean, this is, it's also important to understand what is empathic distress. I can't listen to your suffering because I am mired in my own. Now, everybody understands that happens in a couple, Well, I don't care that you have had to fly and do all of this because I was here at home alone taking care of my sick mother, So I have empathic distress, can't handle your pain because I'm seeped in mine. That happens between communities, that happens between countries. We know that couples often, when they argue, you can ask them not so much what it is that you're fighting about, but you can ask them what it is that you're fighting for. And that basically conflict is often about three predominant things. power and control, who makes the decisions, whose priorities matters more, who's on top, care and closeness, trust. Do you have my back? Can I lean on you? Can I trust you? And number 3, respect and recognition. Do I matter? So it's power, trust, and value. It's basically the 3 main things that are underneath the topic. And I think that in relationships you learn to distinguish the form from the content. That often the form, thing underneath, the way it's shaped, is way more important than the content. If I have decided that you don't care about me, it doesn't matter if we're talking about emptying the dishwasher, my career, our children, our in-laws, our financial situation, it doesn't matter. I will interpret everything through the filter. If I think that you are racist, I will interpret everything through the lens of racism. If I think you are sexist, classicist, I mean, any of those lenses that basically shape our worldview will influence the way I interpret everything you say and do, to the point of distortion. The next piece, and that's probably the last one and the more current one, is polarization. Mm-hmm. Polarization happens when people can't handle the complexity of a situation. And basically, holding the complexity means that you have to hold contradictions. I want my country, but I need to cede territory. I want peace, but I also don't want you to invade me. I want, if I am alone, I have generally to grapple with both sides inside of me. But when you have 2 parties, 2 people, 2 communities, 2 countries, you can easily say, I want A, and you are B. I want peace. You don't want peace.
Yeah.
And I never have to talk about the part of me that doesn't necessarily want peace. And I never have to inquire about the part of you or the people in your country, because governments and people are not the same thing, who actually do want peace. So you split the ambivalence, you project the other part onto the other group, usually the part that you don't want to hold, and you polarize. And now you can go to war.
So that's exactly the same dynamic than in a couple.
There are similarities. I think that it's often, I don't want to make a straight analogy, then people say, well, couples is not the same as politics.
Yeah,
but there are
could be some
people who
things,
deal in intractable conflicts, peace negotiators, people who have sat in Ireland, in South Africa, in mega situations. Actually, they are the ones who understand there is a true line, because relationships are relationships.
Yeah. So we talk geopolitics. In the corporate world, we had someone who used to work for Nike here at Harvest. We just talked about her. And she was hired just after the sweatshops scandal, trying to implement sustainable culture. I also think, like, when I listen to you talking about countries, that the big corporates, like big companies, would benefit from having people like you in their boardroom.
I am in those places. And I probably am not alone.
Tell me about this. So tell me more.
I advise a number of companies.
Okay.
And tech companies that are doing, fintech, where I are related to couples, or culture in the workplace, or mental health. But there's others. I'm not alone. Here's the more important thing. 10 years ago, I would never have been invited to business conferences. Everything changed, not me. The business world changed. In the same way that we brought consumer mentality into the romantic sphere, we also exported psychology into the business world. We talk about authenticity, transparency. We talk about psychological safety in the same sentence that we talk about performance indicators. We talk about trust. We've brought this entire psychological jargon into the workplace. And that is what has, relationship skills used to be called soft skills. And soft skills meant they were feminine skills. And feminine skills meant that you could respect them in principle and disregard in reality. That is a shift. Today, relationship skills are part of the bottom line. And that is related also to the rise of technology and to all the things that AI can replace humans with, and then the places where our humanity is the only thing that we can actually bring, that so far the machines have not yet been able to copy us on. So I think that there is an absolute shift taking place. And it's a challenge because productivity and output and outcome and all these things have always been at the top, and relationships are much harder to measure than outcomes. It's much more subtle. And yet there is a generation today that really needs that relational intelligence in the workplace, because otherwise they don't come to work.
Thank you, Esther. I would like to ask you a few questions, very quick questions before we end up this interview. Séduire, c'est s'apprêter à décevoir. It's in French. I've learned this quote. I can't remember who wrote this. But in English, it would be, if you want to seduce someone, you have to expect this person to be disappointed. Do you relate to that?
That the other person will be disappointed? Or that you will be disappointed? Yes,
the other person. You're going to disappoint the other one. If you seduce
yes, in
someone...
English, I'll give you the English version for it. Expectations are resentments in the making.
Voilà, okay.
Because if you seduce someone, you build expectations. And the wrong expectations are basically going to turn into resentments.
Yeah. Do you agree with that?
I think there's a lot of truth in things like this. I mean, I don't think there's a beautiful word. It's a truism, meaning there's enough truth that you can say it, but that doesn't mean that it's always the case. Yes, when you have expectations, you will have disappointments. But I think that that's the nature of relationships. I mean, any baby who relates to their parent goes back and forth between frustration and delight. They get what they want, and then they cry because they can't. And I mean, how much of our raising young children is saying no to them? So it's actually it's intrinsic. Yeah. You don't have to seduce for that. It's in the nature of relationship. And there used to be an idea that actually the ability to tolerate frustration is one of the essential ingredients of maturity.
Yeah. So it's good to learn how to be
but we have a culture today that would like you never to be frustrated.
Yeah, true.
So
true. That puts a lot of guilt on the parents too.
Yes.
Why? How do you practice yourself being a good spouse?
How I practice to be a good spouse? I try to keep things in perspective and to laugh when my husband tries to bring humor to situations that could become really nasty.
Good.
He's a very good diffuser. And I used to think, no, but you're making fun, And now I think, you're absolutely right. What are we going to do? Argue about this 40 years later, still the same argument? No, you're right.
Good advice.
Humor is a mega panacea.
Okay. What is your favorite?
And to tell him thank you many more times than I do. I think that the actual expression of appreciation in a relationship goes a long way.
Right.
And we don't do it enough. We're very good at saying what the other person didn't do.
Right.
Every one of us.
True. If you couldn't talk anymore about a relationship, if you were forbidden to do that, what would you do? What would you like to do?
Sing.
Yeah, music, of
course. Then I can say what I need to say in songs.
You would still manage to talk about love. Then let's conclude this interview with the harvest of the day. We're in Kaplankaya, and the theme is radical connection. I'm asking to every guest if they can recall a moment. I was more thinking about a meal when they were a child with their parents, and if they can share the food, the people, the atmosphere, a moment where you felt as a child very connected with your family.
I think that one of the moments that, for the first thing that popped into my head is when my parents would come to visit me in New York. We would often organize big dinners on Friday night for Shabbat. And here they were with their very traditional approach in the middle of New York City, in the middle of my very untraditional life. And then we would sing together, and they brought this old world to this, and to about 15, 20 people sometimes. And I just thought, what an incredible syncretism.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Esther.
Pleasure.
And thanks for giving this interview to Harvest series. And I hope you're going to enjoy even more. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching the Harvest series podcast. It was shot in Kaplankaya and with Esther Perel about how to read The Partition of Love.